Alien is one of those great classics of science fiction which struck a chord. Something about the series resounded with people to keep them interested even 40 years after the original's release. That original is often praised as a masterwork in horror films, and its successor, Aliens, often praised as a masterwork in sequels. And while I could talk all day about the strengths of these films and how they managed to find that special place in many a sci-fi fan's heart, it's the third film which is on display here today. Alien 3 was critically panned upon release. If the previous films were a masterwork in filmmaking, Alien 3 was a masterwork in studio interference, to the point where even the director himself, the great David Fincher, in his film debut, disowned the title, and the re-release with the extended scenes became titled the Assembly Cut rather than the Director's Cut. Well, again, I could spend all day talking about the many ways Fox set the film up for failure. Let's try to focus on the movie proper. More recently, Alien 3, notably the Assembly Cut version, has gained some traction with fans, with many coming out of the woodworks to support the film and even claim it reaches the same bar as the previous entries into the series. And it's not entirely difficult to see why. Even in his debut with massive interference, it's easy to tell Fincher had a bright career ahead of him, and the music to the film, with its melancholic chorus, is darkly fitting and sets a moody tone, altogether making for a superbly atmospheric entry into the series. Question is, does the film proper truly hold up? Let's take a look, shall we? One of the largest controversies of Alien 3 was always the opening credits. Set directly after the events of Aliens, before the beginning credits are over, the survivors are violently ejected from the Sulaco and all but Ripley are killed. This put a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. People had grown attached to these characters and they were killed without fanfare at their moment of victory. Some are under the belief that this is why the film was hated, because fans of Aliens couldn't get over the sudden deaths. My stance? Everything about this scene is wrong, and it sets up the rest of Alien 3 for failure. Now bear with me a bit here, this may come across as nitpicky at points, in part due to the sheer number of issues within these opening moments. But nitpicks tend to add up very quickly, and when they tie into major plot points, such as the death of main characters, things become problematic. And right from go, we're off on a bad foot. The first cut is nothing but a quick establishing shot of our survivors in their hypersleep chambers, and a keen eye might quickly notice that the chambers are the wrong shape, and the lighting and room are very different, in that, for some reason, the lights are kept on when nobody's home. The next shot gives us an establishing look that this is indeed the Sulaco, only the colors are backwards. The Sulaco was light with dark lettering, now it's dark with light lettering. Is this a big deal? In the grand scheme, no, but it shows right from go that the filmmakers did not care. Internal consistency is a great thing, and it's one of the big reasons Aliens was so successful. Logical consistency was also big in those films, though a number of aspects, namely the computer systems, are antiquated today. There was still a sense of logic within the universe, of authenticity. Like not utilizing excess energy such as lights when everyone's traveling, or the ship hulls being of lighter color to reflect light rather than absorb it because, believe it or not, heat buildup and the need to vent it is a major issue in space. Alien and Aliens did a standout job of addressing this while remaining consistent with one another. Alien 3, within the first minute, has already established that it's not concerned with consistency within the series, much less anything logical. This is, I'm afraid, a recurring issue. Such as the next cut. We get a scene with the infamous egg in the Sulaco, and we have to address the question. Where did the egg come from? So, let's work it out quick. Did it come from the Queen? Sure, I can believe the Queen laid an egg quick. I mean, these things grow within hours. It hardly strains my suspension of disbelief that the Big Mama could lay a single egg. But where did she lay it? The only time she was alone on the Sulaco was the dropship landing gear, and this is most definitely not the dropship landing gear. If you couldn't tell by the overhead lights and long corridor, maybe you could by the ribs having Sulaco written on their molding, which would come off as more than a bit odd for an aircraft which might depart from the Sulaco at some point and be reassigned elsewhere, as military aircraft tend to do. Aside from which, it would strike me as more than a bit odd that Ripley, who is deeply paranoid of aliens and has recently been surprised by one nonetheless, wouldn't double check to make sure the Queen wasn't the only thing to make it aboard the dropship. So yeah, the Queen theory goes out the window without some serious bending of facts. What about Bishop? He was late coming back to the platform. Maybe he rushed back to the ship, hid away an egg he gathered somewhere, and came back just in time to grab Ripley. And to that didn't happen. While a cute theory, those who subscribe to it forget a little-known fact. The Sulaco is in orbit. While the films cut these landing sequences to look like they take the entirety of a couple seconds, they don't. And Bishop tells us this outright. It was a 50-minute flight time to get from the Sulaco down to the colony. Even during the escape from the complex, it was in the air and took another 16 minutes to land just as the survivors make it to the landing pad. How long would Bishop have had to hide away this egg, and come back? 19 minutes. So, where did this egg come from? Movie magic, that's where. Sure, you could easily come up with a story on how it happened, and a certain critically panned video game did just that, but that's just it. It would be an entire story of explanation required, and that story wasn't in the film. The plot demanded, so it was. I wish this is the only time the plot demanded within this film. Anyway, a couple cuts later, yes, we are still talking about the opening credits, believe it or not, a facehugger climbs on Newt's chamber and cracks the glass. Well, pack it in, she be dead. Some acid blood drips into the middle of the floor, somehow, presumably from the facehugger cutting itself on the glass, which in turn begins an electrical fire, complete with explosions. We see a screen showing a character with a facehugger wrapped around their head. Good luck with that, little buddy. While alarms go off and we see Ripley, convulsing nightmarishly with a hole in her cryotube. And this is where I have to stop the sarcasm and call bullshit. This is something which people seem to miss about these films for some reason. Hypersleep chambers don't actually mean the character is just peacefully asleep in a weird-looking tube. There's no tossing and turning in there. You may occasionally hear reference of the characters in the films talking about freezers or freezing someone. That is hypersleep. It's cryogenic freezing. And cryogenic freezing isn't like throwing water in a freezer. It's an intensely sensitive thing, which is why Burke, an otherwise unskilled company's suit, would be able to easily sabotage them to kill everyone. It's also why waking up from this sleep is so lethargic and exhausting. Hell, the characters aren't even supposed to be wearing clothes lest it freezes to them, but making everyone naked was deemed too graphic for Hollywood. So when Newt's glass was cracked, that was it, game over. She didn't drown, her body was exposed to a sudden accidental thaw which would have very definitely killed her. And that facehugger laid its offspring in a corpse. But no, Ripley's laying there convulsing like she's having the worst night terror ever when she should be this massive block of ice which has been exposed to a dangerous thaw. Again, filmmakers not doing their homework. Anyway, and yes, we are still within the opening credits. The fire apparently gets so bad that the characters are ejected into an emergency escape vehicle, which is in turn ejected from the Sulaco. Why the ship didn't just, say, automatically cut the breakers and vent the fire into space, I don't know. The plot demands. But that's what happens. The EV is launched out directly into the decaying orbit of Furina Fury 161. What? In all of the space, the vast emptiness occasionally sprinkled with rocks and balls of gas, the EV just happens to be ejected within the decaying orbit of a planet. Not just any planet either. Out of all the planets and moons out there, it falls on the one which is something reasonably close to habitable. Not just capable of being inhabited either. It already has been. Colonized for so long that it's already borderline abandoned. And on this lone habitable planet in the middle of space, the EV just so happens to land in the water. Not too far into the water though, just off the shore of the singular small colony present. Yes, that's right. On all the planet, and all the space, and all the universe, the EV just happens to crash land directly beside this colony. Let me put the statistical probability of this in line. You'd probably have a better shot at winning the jackpot 5 lotteries in a row than this circumstance would of occurring. Space, if you did not realize, is kind of big. Remember how the previous film Ripley drifted a bit off course and wound up floating directionless for 57 years before some salvage crew, by complete stupid luck, happened to detect her? That's how big space is. And even that's underselling it. Whatever, the plot demands. At least we're out of the opening credits and I can talk to you about what the true problem with this sequence is. Is it shot well? Certainly. It's actually kinda engaging. But it shows how little regard the filmmakers had for anything. They said, we need Ripley and an alien on this planet, and only Ripley and an alien. So they made some excuses and it happened. Mind you, this is the basis of how plots work. A writer wishes a plot point to happen, so it does. Good writers hide their involvement in this. They create circumstances and lore to support what happens. When plot happens organically, it feels like part of the universe. Often it is an exceptional part, but it is a part we buy into nonetheless. Alien 3 does not do this. Right from start, we're given contradictions, plot holes, inconsistency, logical issues, all back to back. This all tells the audience the filmmakers didn't bother enough to care, and if they didn't, why should we? As mentioned, people often reference how many don't like the film because Hicks and Newt are killed off in the beginning unceremoniously. Well, there's certainly a grain of truth to that. It's more than that, though. These characters were killed, these circumstances were made to happen without regard for any in-universe logic. And if the filmmakers can kill off main characters like this, they can and will do anything, regardless of logic, consistency, or reason. The curtains have been pulled and we can see the machines at work. Thus, the plot demands. Talk about getting off on the wrong foot. I wish I could tell you things become more reasonable from here on out, that the film missed a stride then fell in step, and if we were to just ignore that horrid opening 4 minutes, everything would be sunshine and rainbows. Truly, I do wish. The film proper opens up to the great Charles Dance's Clemens walking along outside peacefully when he happens upon Ripley's body washed up on the shore. Apparently, during the crash, she was somehow ejected from her hypersleep chamber from the EV and washed ashore. Alive. In one piece. With only a couple bruises and a bloodshot eye to show for it. Are you fucking with me, movie? Clemens yells at the other residents to look for other survivors, to which we find that the crash had apparently been bad enough that everyone but Newt had been ejected from their tubes, so only Hicks wound up showing realistic damage from what such an event would entail. Lucky for Ripley, though, that on top of being ejected from a crashing vehicle, which in this film is supposed to increase your survivability, Clemens happens to be a doctor. So, a couple gentle slaps of her cheeks later, and she's coughing up all the water she inhaled and is breathing again. I repeat, are you fucking with me, movie? Is this truly the best you can come up with? Gotta say, by this point, the theatrical version is already off to a superior start. Aside from the incident report coming off far slicker, Ripley is pulled from the EV with the rest, which, as nonsensical as most of the situation is, should one stop and think about it, makes for a bit more sense than she washed ashore after being thrown out of an orbital crash and some dude taking a stroll in sub-zero temperatures along the beach happened to find her. The last bit of which had me quirking my head a bit. Not sure how many of you have experienced 40 below, which, by the way, is the same between Celsius and Fahrenheit, but usually you don't see much in the way of liquid water at that point. Should also make note of the odd editing. In the theatrical, they line up the report with the victims. Here, they line up the line with Ripley with a shot of Ripley, then a shot of Bishop. Then they do a line for Hicks and a shot of Hicks. Then they do a line for Newt and they show off Ripley's smashed cryotube. Whatever. So we come to our next scene where the combined population of this world, a couple dozen inmates and their few superintendents, are holding a meeting to discuss the crash, and immediately you might notice a slight problem. Everyone's bald and wearing gray. This doesn't help in trying to tell people apart when at a glance they look exactly the same. They give a reason for the baldness as a lice infestation, to which I have to question, why? Just why? Where was the person who questions the purpose behind every inclusion in the film, and how did they miss the one that was pointless and counterintuitive? Mind you, Aliens had to deal with this to an extent as well. Most of the secondary characters were Marines in uniform with short hair, but this was very carefully addressed by putting characters with strong personalities in the forefront and having them interact with some of the quieter types, and nearly everyone got a chance to shine, to flash us the basics of their personality, and they further differentiated once they geared up with different weapon types, accessories, and decals. Here, the prisoners look the same. Sure, there are strong personalities, but they're not interacting with each other so much as giving us exposition. Thus, most of the characters wind up blurring together, which ties into the other trouble with the scene. It's exposition heavy to the point of feeling unnatural. The scene begins with Dylan leading the inmates in prayer, indicating the religious nature of the cast. Then enters Andrews, who wishes to clarify the facts of the situation. Why he needs to do this when the prisoners are the ones who pulled the EEV out of the water and grabbed the bodies, I don't know. He then comes out with a bombshell. The lone survivor is a woman. Dun dun dun! And this is where things get a little heavy-handed. Morse, one of the inmates, goes on to tell us how he took a vow of celibacy and doesn't like her there, while Dylan puts on a more level-headed approach of the same. Okay. What, are they gonna uncrash her? Spontaneously change her gender? We get it, you feel uncomfortable around women. What do you want to do about it? Andrews assures the group that he's requested she be rescued immediately, then goes on to question Clemens on if she'll survive. Seems like a conversation that might have been better suited for before the group meeting, but why start with logic now? Anyway, Clemens returns to Ripley, who wakes up, and we have it explained to us yet again that the EEV crashed and Ripley is the only survivor. Thankfully abridged this time, but we are now 14 minutes into this film, and somehow all we've managed to cover is that there was an EEV crash on a prison world, Ripley was the only survivor, and oh, I guess these religious prisoners aren't comfortable when chromosomes are doubled up. Actually, that brings me to a weird point. Apparently the prisoners all have a mutation, which they all have doubled Y chromosomes, which make them, I don't know, extra manly and aggressive, I guess? Which is fucking stupid if you know how genetics work, but I digress. Oh, and one of the dumbest questions ever when Clemens asks her how long she's been in hypersleep. Well, we get to take a break from that to get a minute or so of lore about the industrial complex they're inhabiting, and the bizarre question of Ripley asking, "How do you know my name?" followed by how it was written on her shorts. Because apparently in the future a person's identification number is written on their underwear along with their non-military rank. Well, with that diversion out of the way, we're back to explanations on how everyone died as the pair explore the ruined EEV. Ripley takes a moment to weep for the lost girl. Apparently the writers wanted to explore the idea of Ripley losing her daughter, but missed the fact that that's something which had happened in the previous film, along with the fact that Newt isn't actually her daughter and she'd only known her for a few hours. But I won't judge too harshly considering the scene in question was from Alien's director's cut and a little girl dying is rather sad most any way it's twisted. Anyway, no worry, the sequence serves a purpose as Ripley notices an acid burn mark on Newt's cryotube. Christ, they even admit here the damn things are cryotubes and they still couldn't form a simplistic understanding of it. Ripley promptly demands to see Newt's body to perform an autopsy, suspecting an alien, but upon questioning her motives, she refuses to give a straight answer, making some excuse for cholera, which is okay. I guess she'd been considered crazy for talking about aliens in the past, but, well, we'll get more into this a bit later. For now, repeat after me. The Marines and I encountered a deadly parasite, and I want to make sure the infection hasn't been brought here. But the plot must go on, so Clemens humors her in an autopsy scene which was critically panned at the time for being too gruesome and gory, but looking back was pretty damn reserved for an alien film. Anywho, they confirm Newt drowned, and Clemens, not being a moron, questions what this is really about. Before she stutters up another excuse, however, Andrews and his slow stooge Aaron walk in to question why Ripley has been walking around. And, if you haven't noticed, these are some of the human antagonists of much of the film. Andrews is angry and stupid, while Aaron, nicknamed 85 after his IQ, traded in the angry for an extra dose of stupid. Ripley convinces a lot of them to cremate the bodies, because I guess she's worried aliens can infect more than with chestbursters or something, which Clemens backs her up on because he's a good guy. Still, Andrews gives the usual speech. Hey, the prisoners are religious and you're a woman. Something, status quo, ripples in the water. I can't wait until this guy is no longer in the film. Then the scene ends, so Clemens stops any further line of inquiry so we can cut to a couple of generic prisoners dragging in a dead ox. They joke for a bit, fantasizing about being able to talk to the only woman they've seen in years, but nothing's gonna keep these two from being generic mooks you've already forgotten about. As a kicker to end the scene, one of the prisoners picks up the biggest face hugger in the ever, and yeah, no. Point again toward the theatrical version. You see something like this face hugger laying there, and not many people's reaction is gonna be to pick it up by the tail and ask, "Hey Frank, what's this?" How about, "What in the hell is that thing?" Or, "I've been stuck on this planet with no entertainment for years. I'm gonna tell everyone I just found the biggest fucking spider ever." Except they can't do that, because then Ripley would find out and this would all become a thing. So here's the part I think I should mention this. We come through with the cremation birth sequence, which I will say is pretty well done. Yeah, the symbolism is pounded over our heads a little heavy for my taste, but the scene and music is absolutely beautiful, and Dylan's speech is great. However, we are 30 minutes into the film, about 25 into the theatrical cut, and I have to point this out here. The theatrical cut is, right now, better put together. It cuts out even just a little of the stupidity, like Ripley being thrown from the EV or the facehugger being found and never mentioned by anyone ever again. The editing is far better, with our cutting to the damage caused in the crash as the report is made in a far slicker sequence. It also cuts out a lot of the redundancy that we get elsewhere in the opening, such as part of the rumor control speech, which only reiterates what the film already pounds us with, like Dylan being a religious leader and 85 being a dim stooge. I'll also admit that I kind of prefer the dog to the ox, as the brutality of the face hug and chest burst is heartbreaking, even though said chest burster is oddly sized, to say the least, for a dog. The only downside here is we don't get the chat between Frank and Murphy, which would have made for halfway decent development if any focus was put onto the characters and either of them were featured further within the film. As it is, it winds up this oddly placed, directly before the cremation, long-running scene between two unrecognizable characters that don't matter and aren't given further attention. This isn't to say the theatrical version is better, mind you, just that the assembly cut isn't quite the bee's knees, with major issues of its own design, especially in this opening fifth of the film. And I'm just going to point this out here. The runner alien and the implication that different hosts might lead to different aliens is a really fucking good idea. Easily the best thing that this film brought to the franchise. You'll see me shit on quite a bit of this film, but This was a genuinely great concept. Anywho, the alien is born and Ripley shaves her head. We then cut to our classic alien mess hall scene where we get to develop characters, and this is where the assembly cut starts pulling ahead. We see Dylan as more than just a religious leader and are introduced to Golic, the crazed weirdo even amongst the prisoners who nobody likes. It's a nice scene. Then Ripley walks in, without an escort and into the middle of the group because, of course, there has to be tension. It completely hijacks the scene. Let's go back to Aliens for a moment. Remember their own last meal, how everyone was shooting shit and we got to focus on building those characters? They started that here, then in walks Ripley, and suddenly the only characters who exist are her and Dylan, even Andrews and Aaron shutting up and watching while Clemens is mysteriously absent. No worries though, as the next scene we cut to more exposition about how Dylan and the others found God, joined an apocalypse cult, and elected to stay on the planet to run the facility after it closed down, which is why there's so few of them. Why the company would think it's profitable to keep such a run-down, useless facility running and sending in supply ships, I don't know. The plot demands. Done with his exposition, Clemens finally resumes his inquisition of what Ripley was after. She instead decides to distract him with fucking. Meanwhile, Murphy, I told you he wouldn't last long, is scraping a vent tunnel when he comes across some shed alien skin. He peers into a nearby hole and minus points for the assembly cut because he mistakes the alien for his dog, which only appears in the theatrical cut. Whoopsie. The alien spits acid in his face. Apparently it can do that, but only this one time for whatever reason. And Murphy recoils in pain and is sucked into the fan, because apparently they wanted the most over-the-top and bloody death possible, and according to physics, you can only be sucked into fans when you've already been injured. Which of course raises the question, why was he cleaning near the sucking fan at all? Never mind that. We cut back to Ripley, who, dun dun dun, discovers Clemens has a prisoner's barcode. Clemens, having successfully gotten his rocks off, is no further undeterred from his line of inquiry. She gives him a BS answer about bad dreams and confronts him about being a prisoner, which he denies. Rather than explaining himself, he reads the script and informs us, Ripley, that it's not yet time to explain his past, in part because it's another 5 seconds until 85 rudely interrupts the pair to inform them of Murphy's death. The three staff investigate the death, and Clemens informs the other pair that it was Murphy who died, judging by his boot. I'm happy that someone can tell the group apart based on their clothing. He then finds the burn mark from the acid spit. Oh, so that's why I was suddenly given the ability to do that and would proceed to never utilize such an ability again. And stares in confusion as 85 prattles on. The fan was blowing, he realizes, meaning Murphy had to have been pushed in. Right. That is exactly what happened, bud. Andrews doesn't like him getting all investigative, and so it demands a meeting to chew him out in 30 minutes. I guess so that Clemens can get another scene with Ripley, who is in the process of grabbing the EEV flight computer. This works out perfectly for the plot, as Clemens can inform Ripley about the burn mark and point out to her where to find the remains of Bishop so she can ask it some questions. But he can't go there with her because he has a meeting with Andrews, and Lord knows she can't wait. Oh well, it's not like this is a prison full of murderers and rapists or anything. Anyway, he once again resumes his questioning, and once again she dodges. Okay, this is starting to drag a bit. We get a quick cut of Gawk and his group making their way into the darkness to light candles, I guess, where Gawk continues to show off that, yes, he is weird, and the other two that, yes, they are generic and about to die. Then it's back to Clemens and Andrews, where, if you somehow weren't aware before, let me tell you about how Andrews is an antagonist. He starts chewing Clemens out for letting Ripley out of the infirmary? What? Weren't you in the mess decks with her? Oh, whatever. Clemens tries to leave, but Andrews threatens to tell Ripley his secret past, and goes on to insult him for being inquisitive. Now, it may sound like I'm making fun of the film for this scene, but reality is it's kind of realistic. Andrews is the typical overinflated tough supervisor who yells first and asks questions later. You know the sort, the toxic boss who thinks he's hot shit and almost kills someone every time he has to make a decision about breakfast, never mind anything of import. And you know what? This might actually be decent development for these two characters and their relationship going forward. If either of them survived more than 20 more minutes and we didn't still have over half the film to go. Well, back to Ripley, who manages to find Bishop in the junkyard. Why not the same junkyard as the EV? Before, who would have guessed it, a bunch of prisoners ambush her and try to gang rape her to some weirdly out of place heavy metal rock. Do you get it? They're gonna rape her. You know, like an alien. Lucky Dylan shows up to kick everyone's ass because, despite being a self-described murderer and rapist of women, he's a good guy. Then we're back to Golic and his group, who are surveying the abandoned facility, I guess. Anyway, they notice the candles are going out behind them. Seems the alien is a secret asshole. And one of the lot goes back to relight them. Somehow he basically steps right over the damn thing while it's crouched on the ground and it attacks, ripping them apart. The other two take one glance at this and book it to the pleading of their companion, only to take one corner and immediately come across the corpse of said companion? Okay. Feels like something was lost in the shooting here. In any case, the other guy is promptly slaughtered in front of Golic, and lucky for the screaming crazy man, it decides two is enough and doesn't chase after this one. And it's at this point that I have to call out bullshit once again. Aliens and killing have become pretty ingrained into people's heads, yet the actual body count at the hands of a full-grown adult alien is pretty low. Let's look at the first two films quick. How many of the 7 aboard the Nostromo are outright killed by an adult alien? Cain's by chestburster, Brett is still alive and screaming while he's being carried into the ceiling, Dallas disappears without a drop of blood found, Ash is taken out by the rest of the crew, leaving Parker, who attacked it, and Lambert, who was scripted to die by pure fright, but they never managed to put it to film. So we have 1, maybe 2 depending on how you look at the scene. What about aliens? An entire colony and all those Marines, we gotta have a hell of a death toll, right? Yet, when the Marines go through the facility, not a single corpse is found, not a drop of blood. Human blood, at least. All that were found were in the atmosphere processor. Hudson didn't get a single blip in the primary complex. Well, what of the Marines? Dietrich and Apone are taken, Frost is burned by flamethrower, Crow is killed in the resulting explosion, Drake is engulfed in acid from a killed alien, Hudson is taken, Burke is taken, Gorman and Vasquez blow themselves up, and that leaves Wazbeski, who looks like he was in the process of being taken and may have died from wounds inflicted by the explosion, Spunkmeyer, who disappears, so who knows, and Farrow, who was killed attempting to fight back. So, 1 confirmed, 2 maybe. We're not even halfway through Alien 3. It has just fully grown up and already has more confirmed kills than all the other adult aliens in both prior films combined. Gone, apparently, is its need to procreate. It just kills and kills and kills, pretty much as the plot demands. No one is ever taken. Nobody's cocooned. They're just killed. Thus does the alien transform from a strange and frightening unknown to a generic B-movie slasher villain. Well done, writers. You suck. Anyway, back to Ripley, who has at some point learned that androids have ports in their ears. Anyway, Bishop wakes up and Ripley gets him to access the flight computer from the EEV. Back again to Golic, who, because he's crazy, is found in the mess hall covered in blood, which sets off a couple warning bells, as you might imagine. Back to Ripley, who tries to cut straight to the point. Was there an alien aboard? To which she is informed, yes. Well, it's nice to see the ship was paying attention. Thanks for fucking telling anybody. Would have been nice to know that before the entire fucking crew was ejected into a planet along with the thing which caused the mess. Back to Golic, whom the staff and Dylan violently subdue because somehow they see this as the most effective way of compliance. Anyway, more exposition from Bishop. The company knows everything, and he wants to permanently shut down because he'll never be top of the line again. Dark. We are interrupted from morning, however, as Golic is dragged into the infirmary and strapped down. Dylan questions him about his missing compatriots while Andrews laments the pointlessness of questioning him because, he's an inept supervisor. When Ripley interrupts and decides to finally come forward with the facts. Andrews tries to pull the rank card, but in the end Ripley gets her sit down with the big man. And, of course, Andrews dismisses her entirely. Which is fair, he's an idiot. What's less fair is Ripley isn't an idiot. This entire thing is stupid. You have a military flight computer. You have an android which can reach it. You have an EV which crash landed with a peculiar lack of normal crew. Hell, you didn't even need to describe the full extent of the alien to begin with. Just, hey, we came across this deadly parasite on this last planet. Would you help me check and make sure it didn't somehow make its way here? That'd be great. But no, the plot must have conflict, so people are stupid. Whereupon we go to the next big kicker. There are no weapons on the planet. It's a prison planet, and they don't house any weapons because they don't need them. It's not like the prisoners can escape or anything, which might make for a decent excuse if we weren't talking about a prison full of violent murderers and rapists, some of whom don't exactly think rationally. Lucky we have that EEV. There's no way a marine escape ship would suddenly launch a bunch of infantry out without warning and no way to protect themselves, right? Right? Well, at least they have the honor system. Ripley is confined back in the infirmary where she goes back to shooting shit with Clemens and immediately clams back up about the alien. But oh no, she is feeling a bit sick. I wonder why? Clemens prepares a cocktail and finally relays his own sad backstory. Then is killed. Not Golic, who is tied down in the corner whimpering and squirming, but Clemens, the guy partially hidden behind a curtain. We then come to the film's iconic scene where the alien crawls in face to face with the helpless and horrified Ripley and doesn't do anything. Not gonna take her to get cocooned or anything? Oh, you're gone already. Well, I'm sure that's fine. It's not like anything could happen that would threaten the future of your species. At least it grabbed Clemens for a snack. Ripley races to the other side of the facility where Dylan is admonishing the group for their behavior and Andrews is having one of his rumor control flexes. Ripley interrupts them, to which Andrews begins admonishing her. And since he's served his use as a one-note antagonist, it's time for him to go. Let's go back through that sequence again. The alien drops down, ignores the easy prey, ignores the chick with a chestburster, and kills some random dude. It then races across the facility and kills Andrews, in the middle of everyone. It doesn't grab him and cocoon him, it just gibbs him. Because apparently, the plot demanded that everyone should now be certain of the alien's existence, and Ripley should have no further human foil. At least they were nice enough to clean up his mess after. But now we come to a problem. We have a lack of characters in this film. Mind you, there's still plenty of meatbags left, but who, aside from Ripley, has the film put any real focus on? Andrews, Clemens, and Dylan. There's also Golic and 85 who are more recognizable from the masses, and they've tried going through the motions a little with Morse and Frank, but none of these guys stand out. We're halfway through the film and there's not really anyone we're pulling for. Sure, there's Ripley, but it's painfully obvious she's gestating an alien and we all know how that's gonna end. So, who else? Nobody's really been developed, and those who were, even among those we've lost, were pretty one-note characters. Andrews was the unreasonable supervisor and was never anything more or less. Aaron is a stupid minion and is never anything more or less. Morse is loud and scathing. Golic is crazed and unpredictable. Even Clemens and Dylan suffer this. Clemens is inquisitive. That's it. Dylan is the firm but fair leader. That's it. They try to cover this up by giving the two backstories as if they have reached some redeeming tale, but this doesn't play out in the film, doesn't change their character or add something new to them. We never see the arrogant fuck-up Clemens or the violent sociopath Dylan. The disappointment to this reaches further when you look back at the prior two films, which were lessons in character development. Nobody had some great backstory, or if they did, we never heard it. And the characters often had multiple facets revealed as the films developed, and especially as things went sour. I could go into a whole character study about some of the major folk we see in the films, but let's go with someone relatively minor for comparison. Let's take Drake. Drake tended to be one of the quieter Marines, so we didn't get too many lines out of him. Yet we still got tons to his character to see the individual he was. He's got a dry, scathing sense of humor coming out of the cryotubes and shows he's close with Vasquez. He gets on well with the others with his tough sense of humor, being the one to hold Hudson down during the knife trick. On the job, though, he's all business, pure professional, no more fun and games, even as the others still crack jokes. And when shit goes down, his fight or flight response goes squarely to fight, and he has to be repeatedly reminded to keep up with the rest of the fleeing Marines as he covers their escape. Something he fails to do, dying to keep the hive at bay. Multiple conditions, multiple facets to his character. This is a realistic depiction of a character, someone who, minor though they may be, is fully developed. The characters in Alien 3 never show these multiple facets. At best, Dylan might go from prayer directly to tough love, or Clemens might go from exposition to inquisition. Show, don't tell. Alien and Aliens showed us characters. Alien 3 tells us characters. And now, of the handful of characters it has told us, we're down to two characters we've been told most of, who we've spent scenes building to no purpose. Hey look, Andrews and Clemens have a contentious relationship. What does that amount to? Nothing. They're dead in a couple scenes and nothing came or comes of it. What about Drake and Vasquez? We see their closeness as they disobey orders together, as Vasquez tries to save him but fails, then grows dark and angry for the rest of the film until, at the end, she repeats his same mistake. Purpose, development. Here, not so much. But back to the film. The survivors gather together to figure out what to do next and who's in charge. Dylan states firmly it's not him because he's not the officer type, even though he basically runs the group. Which leaves Ripley to formulate a plan and, oh hey, she references a previous film. Accurately, the aliens are indeed afraid of fire. Half the film, and finally there was a callback which wasn't fucked up in translation. Anyway, we get some exposition on how run down the facility is, ending with the question of, what are we gonna do? And apparently that's the end of the meeting as we cut to Ripley and Aaron in front of a vent system as Ripley continues to formulate a plan. Aaron points out that the vent system is enormous, running for miles, but Ripley assures him that it won't go far. It likes to stick close to its prey. If you say so. In any case, the plan is formulated. There's an unused nuclear waste storage facility with inescapable walls and doors. By coating the vents with an explosive flammable substance, they plan to flush the alien into the room and lock the door. She meets back with Dylan to go over the plan, who proceeds to ask her one of the dumber questions of the film, and why should we put our ass on the line for you? Bruh, you're being picked off one by one and still have a better part of a week until help arrives, to your knowledge. Unless you've got a better plan to stay alive, shut the fuck up and pick up a mop. Which, to be fair, Ripley more or less states in a more polite manner. And off the prisoners go to work, painting the walls and vents in napalm while we wait for something to go wrong. Because we're just over the halfway mark and the facility is now coated in napalm while these guys lug around detonators and cigarettes while the alien roams around somewhere nearby. So of course something's gonna go wrong. Thus do we come across Franks, one of the last few recognizable individuals left. He drops a detonator, but fortunately it doesn't ignite anything. As he slowly reaches to pick it up, We see the alien looking on from overhead. Slowly he climbs back up, and there the alien is, waiting for him. This time, when he drops the detonator, they aren't so lucky, and the facility is suddenly engulfed in an explosive blast of fire. Ripley and Dylan rush to find the sprinklers and hopefully save some of the workers to find the system not working. And here we come to one of the main and best additions to the assembly cut. Ripley comes across two of her main rapists and helps put the fire out on one. The other, Junior, runs to help the others when, surprise, the plan works. The alien is flushed out, but without everything fully set up, there's nothing to lure it into the disposal room. Nothing except Junior. Realizing this, the Khan bellows out his only line in the film and lures it in, Ripley shutting the door behind them while he screams his death throes inside. The prisoners look on in horror while Dylan angrily turns on the sprinklers. Finally, a showcase of real character development, showing us a character who acts like a despicable dirtbag but redeems himself for the good of everyone when push comes to shove, giving his life for theirs. If only he had more than one line in the film. The prisoners hold a funeral while 85 informs Ripley about how the rescue team is doing another few days and how he'll be glad when they kill it, to which Ripley gives him a knowing look and decides not to break the news. Then we're back to Golic, who is still locked up in the infirmary. Why? Like, don't get me wrong, I get it, he's crazy, he probably should have been locked up tighter all along. But what's changed for him between the beginning and now? Morse tells him they managed to lock the thing up, then takes sympathy on Golic, releasing him. Then Golic shows how crazy he is, knocking Morse out. Cut back to Ripley and 85, who are writing a report to the company, and they did it. They called it a xenomorph. This is one of those things that was cut from the theatrical version because the scene is dumb and pointless, but let me get this rant out of the way. Xenomorph isn't its name. Xenomorph was a terminology Gorman used during his brief to the Marines. Hell, it's a species nobody officially knows about, much less believes in. Why would it have been designated a name? Look at the fucking name for 2 seconds. Xenomorph. Greek for strange form. He was literally calling it an alien in a different language. That's not what its fucking name is. That was just Gorman trying to sound smart to his subordinates. It was subtle humor to showcase the kind of officer Gorman was. Really, it blows my mind that writers have adopted this name. It's one thing for the fanbase to address it as such since they have to call it something. It's another for in-universe individuals to officially designate the alien the Greek word for alien. Whenever this pops up, all that tells me is that the writer in question wasn't paying much attention to the scene and doesn't understand two of the most recognizable Greek words. Anyway, the point of the scene is to showcase that the company wants the alien alive, an issue I'll go over later. But the sequence proves pointless as they cover the same information again a few scenes later with the same exact characters. Another point against the assembly cut. Back to Golic, who approaches the disposal facility, and somehow the fact that he's free and still covered with blood isn't a huge fucking red flag because the door guard watches him approach and lets him slit his throat. Golic opens the door, walks into the room, and a nice crunch later, the dragon's been freed. Cut to Ripley approaching Dylan about wanting to kill the alien before the company gets their hands on it, and I can't put this off any longer. Ripley wants to kill the alien before the company can get their hands on it because they'll use it as a weapon. That's fucking stupid. On so many levels. First, of course they want to get their hands on it. It's an alien. Big shock, there's people out there who'd want to research it. Like we tend to wish to research most animals that exist. What's the difference with this one? That it kills people? Yeah, there's quite a few things that do that. Look up the Savo man-eaters sometime and realize we didn't wipe lions from the face of the earth. Second, the idea that they'd be unable to control it. Why not? Do you know how many infectious things biochemical facilities keep locked tight? Hell, this ragtag group of unarmed nobodies in a rundown facility managed to lock it up just fine, yet somehow the company would be unable to do so? Third, that they'd use it as a weapon. No, they wouldn't. That's dumb. We have so many bioweapons which are so much more deadly, not to mention infectious and controllable, yet this idiot idea is being pushed that xenomorphs are being sought as a future of warfare. Get the fuck out of here with that. This is from the same idiot school of thought which was weaponizing the raptors in Jurassic Park. Now I get it. Ripley is traumatized. She is pissed. She's not stupid. She's got a vendetta against the alien and doesn't trust the company, but let's not try to play this off as something that's not. This is the point where everyone else can challenge her and her obvious bias which could potentially threaten them. They don't. The closest we get is Dylan's "I don't care because they don't care about us." But in comes Morse, who breaks the news and points the assembly cut for this part of the edit. The theatrical cut, there was some question on why only a handful of survivors are having this conversation, where here it's the immediate respondents, which, to be fair, are the only ones close to being real characters left in the film. Anyway, while they argue about not knowing what to do, Ripley begins feeling more under the weather, so she runs off to the EV to get a body scan, because apparently it came with state-of-the-art medical equipment, but didn't house a single weapon. 85 meets up with her and runs a scan where, dun dun, chestburster. Oh wow, I am the surprised. And by the way, this is also one of the weirdest editing cuts in the film, which has always sort of bothered me, where Ripley has her eyes open, cut to Aaron for the reveal, then back to Ripley, who dramatically opens her eyes. Anyway, Ripley asks 85 to freeze the image so she can see it, even though the scanner is already stowed, so the image should be a recording. And we go to Dylan, who's got something close to a sensible idea. Lay low and together in a place without vents so it can't sneak up on anyone. Well, the rest don't seem to like that much, because what if it attacks? Well, then you fight it. As a group. But then Morse comes up with the idea of settling in a furnace because it doesn't like fire. Goody. Back to Ripley, and she wants to send out a message to keep the rescue team away. Aaron, rightfully, says the most intelligent thing he's come up with his entire life, which Ripley doesn't much appreciate, but without Aaron to enter his password, she has no recourse and decides to go into the vent system because, fuck it, she's got nothing better and is doomed anyway. As she walks away, Aaron receives a message stating that the EEV scan was sent and the team is expediting their arrival to 2 hours, and also to quarantine Ripley, hinting at the fact that the company really wants this thing. Told you the prior bit was pointless. We see Ripley wander into the system on her suicide mission, hoping to either kill the alien or have it kill her before the Queen is born. I suppose she forgot the third option, where it cocoons her to the wall until she gives birth. I suppose the writers did as well, because it didn't happen. Instead, we get this weird hallucinatory fake-out scene where we find out Ripley has the strength of Thor as she stabs a massive hole into a lice-infested steel pipe. The alien confronts her, then fade to black because it seems they couldn't figure out how to resolve this scene with both the alien and Ripley still alive and free. Instead, we cut to Dylan, who isn't in the furnace. Ripley begs him to kill her and the Queen inside of her so that it doesn't wipe out the whole universe. Dylan considers a moment, then refuses because she's their best chance of fighting it. What? Weren't you planning to lay low until the rescue team arrived? Since when are you fighting it? Everyone gathers near the furnace where the group debates killing it, and I kinda like that this is a debate. On one side you have Ripley, who is crazed with hate and completely suicidal. On the other you have Aaron, the supposedly dumbest person on the planet, who is also the only one left speaking sense. He thinks it's crazy to try and take on the alien when the rescue team arrives in another hour. If they hunker down, they'll probably all live. Ripley thinks the company will kill all of them, which, okay, they've been rather careless with her in the past, and Burke was certainly going to try pulling some shady shit to get past quarantine. What her crazed self doesn't realize, though, is that there's a line between crew expendable and kill everyone involved, between Burke trying to cover his own ass for accidentally wiping out a colony and some bigwigs trying to collect a specimen. 85, ironically, realizes this. Ripley doesn't. Guess who the prisoners side with? Though, funnily, Morse quite obviously agrees and is peer pressured to join the rest. Dillon gives some big speech which convinces the prisoners to take one last shot at taking the alien down, and another plan is formulated. This time, the group plans to lure the alien into the lead works, closing the doors off one by one until it's trapped, then pushing it into the mold with a piston where they'll pour hot lead over it. Not a horrible plan, other than the fact that half the doors don't work and they're using themselves as lure. And the sequence itself actually might be halfway decent, these nobodies of the universe making their suicidal stand against the alien, if not for two big problems. First, the segment is confusingly shot. There's little sense of what the architecture of this place looks like, thus there is little sense of what progress they're making. Is the plan working? Has it fallen to shit? Are they making do despite setbacks? It's impossible to say. Which may be the point, I guess? By a certain point, the prisoners become just as lost, but it's difficult to get into the scene when you've got no reference for progression. Second, there are no characters left. Ripley and Dillon are staying closer to the mold while the rest do the dangerous work, and of them, only one's been characterized, Morse. Oh sure, this guy told us 85's backstory and these two were in on the rape attempt, but outside that, most of the guys have barely had a speaking line, and haven't even been named. The climax of this film is a bunch of unrecognizable nobodies killing themselves. So the scene kicks off with the death of one of the group. No, really, we don't even get to see which of them was killed, and things are going okay for a while. Then some of the guys are picked off one by one, and things go less okay. And I can't decide on the visuals here. On one hand, this was the start of the fishbowl effect, which was kind of cool to see the chase from the alien's perspective. On the other, the alien really does look like shit. They green screened a puppet, but the effect always looked off. Also, I know I mentioned it before, but really, what the hell is this alien doing? It cuts through 8, or more, it's hard to tell, of these guys in a space of about 10 minutes for the purpose of what exactly? Might be it's protective of the Queen, but it's sure not preparing for her. Meanwhile, a company ship, of the same make and model as the Sulaco, lands on the planet. Huh. I wonder why the Marines never thought of that one. Maybe because the ship was blatantly designed never to enter our atmosphere, and that's why they've got dropships. But it is kind of hilarious seeing this wingless tube whose main thrusters are to the rear, floating down like a giant middle finger touching down on Isaac Newton's face. A bunch of suited up company soldiers encounter Aaron, who is wisely sitting this whole sequence out, and I have to make note of the ape suits, which look properly badass and maybe one of the more logical and better thought out additions to the lore. Aaron points them, and a mysterious figure, toward the furnace as our anti-heroes finish their fight. And what a fight. Finally lured into the mold by Dillon grabbing Ripley with only Morse left to close the door behind it, they encounter a teensy problem. It can climb right out. So Dillon stays as the last bit of bait, demanding Ripley climb out ostensibly because the alien has to die first, and takes it on with some good old-fashioned fisticuffs while Morse pours hot lead over it. Wait, what? That can't be right. Let me read through that again. Huh. That's odd. It says here that Dillon lured the alien in while Morse locked it in and poured the tons of molten lead and killed it. Well, we can't have that. Ripley's a hero, so she has to be the one to kill it. Thus does the alien survive being crushed and deep-fried in molten lead, because, as we know, a lead bath isn't far removed from a hot tub, and leaps out. So they decide to turn on the sprinklers, which are connected to a chain in reach of Ripley rather than connected to the control panel Morse is using. And as we know from the bucket from the fire that was earlier in the film, hot and cold don't combine well, and the alien cracks and explodes all over the leadworks. Which I find hilarious. After the impressive display of physics-defying feats we've encountered during the last few minutes, the writer was like, "Oh yeah, logic," and decided to kill the alien with thermodynamics. Mostly because, as we know, Ripley must be the one to kill the alien. The plot demands. Celebrations are cut short, however, when the company walks in led by Bishop, who claims he was the human creator of the Bishop model and the basis for its look, which turns out to be true, as we come to find. Seems that in the wide expanse of space, which can take weeks or even months to traverse, they just happen to have this guy in reserve, like 1 day away. He tries to convince Ripley to let him surgically remove the alien so they can kill it, which of course is BS, so Ripley shuts the gate on his face and gets Morse to move the platform back over the furnace. Well, the company mercs don't like this too much, so one of them shoots Morse in the knee, but Bishop calls him off because, as it turns out, he's not a complete asshole. Well, 85 doesn't like this, so, true to his name, he picks up a wrench and slams it into the back of Bishop's head, and gets lit the fuck up for it. I guess this was supposed to be his big redemption moment or something, but yeah. Managed to survive an entire alien film and you attack a guy surrounded by proven trigger-happy paramilitary sorts. Whatever. Bishop bloodily announces he's not a droid and pleads again, this time honestly, to let him examine the creature. Then, if the religious symbolism in the film wasn't enough, try this one on for size. The theatrical does one extra, having the queen burst from her chest only to be held down to the end, but thankfully the assembly version gets rid of that bit of stupidity. With that in mind though, I do feel it worth mentioning how silly it is that Ripley never got chest bursted in this film. This was the start of a bad trend where nobody could decide how long aliens gestated. Is it a few hours, a few days, a few minutes? In this film, the Ox-Dog alien does so in maybe a couple hours. For Ripley, around a day and it hadn't burst. And sure, I get that it's a queen, but need I truly remind you that these things tend to grow kinda fast? Whatever, I'm no alien biologist. Safiria 161 is shut down and closed forever, and, hilariously, Morse is walked out all nice and alive. Meaning, if the prisoners hadn't gone through with this whole suicidal idea, then they'd all be headed off planet intact. Then, as if they wanted to pull one last fuck you to the lore, they begin playing Ripley's farewell message from the end of Alien from the remains of the EEV. Seems the writer confused the narcissists with the Sulaco EEV. This film is a mess. In every possible way. It is often beautiful and atmospheric, but there was no saving this one. You could tell Fincher had a beautiful career ahead of him, but at the same time, some of these shots were really not done well. Then don't get me started further on all the issues with the story. In terms of development, lore, consistency, and so much else, the film is irredeemably bad. I can see why people might love it, but as soon as you think twice about most anything, the film crumbles. And a big part of this was, I'm afraid, Ripley. Now again, I love the character of Ripley, and Sigourney Weaver put on a hell of a performance here which absolutely stole the show. However, she was such a show stealer that it didn't leave any time for the rest of the characters, even those few who were supposed to stand out. By the time she wakes up, it's rare to see a scene in which she isn't being addressed. It's one thing to be the protagonist, it's another to be the center of the universe. Unfortunately, this film began a trend of the latter, where they had to feature a Ripley-like character yet failed to develop such a character to the extent or quality of Ripley. The universe became the eternal struggle between the alien and a Ripley-like character, a narrative this film helped push along with the ridiculous confrontation scene where Ripley states that the alien has been in her life for so long she doesn't remember anything else, even though she's only known about its existence for a few months of her waking life. They're trying to symbolize here how she is intrinsically tied to the alien, like they're superhuman arch-rivals. Which is a cute idea until you realize that they're closing off development of the lore and the series by ingraining this idea into people's minds when much of what made the previous films so great was the expansion of lore, of the enormous, free, yet dangerously unknown universe as opposed to one chained by symbolism. So what would make it better? There's a cut in here between the assembly and theatrical versions which would reduce quite a few problems each individual version had. The assembly cut is decidedly better as it develops a few scenes and characters far better, but the theatrical cuts out or revises a ton of stupidity which shouldn't have made it into the assembly version. What would make it better? Pretty much a major rewrite. But alright, suppose you wanted to tell a story about an alien on Fury 161. For starters, cut out the Sulaco. Do that and you're getting rid of a ton of problems right from go. No plot holes about how the alien got there. No having to coordinate what the sets are supposed to look like between films. No pissing people off that you're killing off a bunch of characters, and no Ripley. Now I get it. I love Ripley. Truly I do. She is one of my favorite film characters. She didn't have a place for this film to truly explore, and the focus put around her took away from the much needed development everyone else had. Instead, it's an unknown. Some unknown EEV crashes down onto the planet. Where is it from? What's going on? What was it doing there? We can begin with so many of the same story beats, except now there's no ties to another film to worry over, and suddenly we have freedom to do what we want with the EEV. Not to mention there's a lot of mystery from Go, which gets us invested. There's a survivor and a synthetic, but they're in rough shape and most certainly won't be walking around anytime soon. Instead, focus goes to the prisoners. They're whispering among each other, spreading rumors and gossip as they go about their daily lives, especially when they receive a high-level communique from the company about their sending a rescue team. What would the company want with some crashed ship? They don't roll out the red carpet for every piece of salvage. Then the survivor is chest-bursted and blame starts going around. People start pointing fingers, believing a murderer to be amongst them, while Clemens remains doubtful. How did a murderer blow out the survivor's chest from the inside? Meanwhile, Golic and his group delve deep into the facility to perform their weekly check of the facility's pilot light. We don't follow them, though. Instead, we cut to more of the investigation, more blaming. Such and such didn't like the idea of their sanctity being invaded. Such and such was an ex-hater. Such and such was joking about pulling out their still beating heart, blah blah. Then Golic returns, alone. And if he wasn't right before, he sure isn't now. The group question him, but all he can do is rave about a dragon. By now, the prisoners are getting antsy. Some want Andrews to break out the guns because it's a fucking prison, of course it had guns. But he refuses and has Dylan organize a party to search for the missing pair. A group goes in after them while Dylan and Clemens continue to question Golic. Andrews, and Aaron by extension, having long given up on getting straight answers and firmly under the belief that he's the murderer. We cut between them and the search party as we get something close to a real answer, and they manage to find him. One barely conscious and cocooned in tightly. The other is unresponsive, and no longer entirely resembles a human, having been placed in a fetal position with strange growths around him. Before sense can be made of the pair, however, the alien attacks. Some try to fight, others run. Only those who run make it back out. Further questions are raised. Clemens wishes to check the EEV flight computer to see if it might tell them what they're dealing with, while many of the prisoners are screaming for weapons so they can defend themselves or get revenge. Only Dylan standing between them and violence. And even that doesn't keep Aaron from being attacked at one point. Andrews stands resolute against all this. It is against protocol to tamper with a crashed flight computer, and it is against protocol to allow prisoners weapons, and he is a man of protocol. They will wait for the rescue team's arrival, and that's his final word. The prisoners are left to fume while Clemens and Aaron speak with him alone, but the superintendent cannot be swayed and dismisses the pair. Alone now in his office, the alien drags him away. Andrew's disappearance quickly becomes noticed, and the prisoners turn to Aaron to finally release the weapons and give them a fighting chance. However, the poor second-in-command lives up to his nickname and has forgotten the code to the weapon lockers. However, he does have computer access, which Clemens uses to dig into the flight computer and finally get answers on what happened. There he gets a story about how the crew to the EV was sent to check the remains of LV-426 and found the derelict protected behind a mountain pass. Specimens were gathered on company orders, but the danger wasn't fully disclosed and the crew was wiped out. The ship was put into orbit around Fury 161 as the situation became worse, finally ejecting the EEV with the infected survivor who'd been frozen to hopefully halt the process. Aaron states something about how that explains a lot, while Clemens still has questions about why exactly the ship was put into their orbit at all. In the meantime, more and more of the prisoners are disappearing. Sometimes there's a final scream. Just as often, they don't even get that. There's just one less face to see in the assembly hall. A group formulates to stick together. They realize they're being taken too fast now, and the rescue team won't arrive in time. With no way to access weapons, they begin seeking alternatives. Together, they come up with the fire plan, not to flush the alien out, but to try to burn it alive. Using a vent system, they're going to push so much fire and hot air through the system that nothing could live. There are reservations. What about those who are taken? To which Clemens, having seen the flight computer, coldly responds, "They're already dead." Thus, the plan is put into motion, and it goes about as well as it does in the film. The fire is started abruptly and too soon, but it is effective, burning out the hive. As a bonus, the alien, or at least one of them, is flushed into the middle of the group, and we retain Junior's sacrifice as he lures it to a storage bunker and the door is locked behind them. The handful of survivors pick through the burned out system to see the extent of the damage. First they find the corpses of their fellow workers, then those who'd been taken, and even a couple other aliens. Some animosity is held toward Clemens, who left these men to die, but Dillon shuts them down. A funeral is held as the bodies of human and alien are gathered and dumped into the furnace to prevent any further chance of infection. Meanwhile, Clemens finds the synthetic that had crashed with the EV and reactivates it, trying to fill in some holes. The synthetic proves dodgy, but we see how cold Clemens can be as he threatens to leave the synthetic activated and alone in simulated pain, unable to move its power source without the rest of its body to wear it down, good for another 100 years. The synthetic breaks down after this, showing just how close to human they might be, and reveals that the crew wished to destroy the alien once it began threatening them. So it set orbit around Fury 161, so should the creature be threatened, it could jettison the freezers in the EV with a living sample without threat of destruction or being lost in space. Thus, when the self-destruct sequence was eventually initiated, the synthetic was in position to escape with a singular survivor, ejecting prematurely to keep the others from boarding. Disgusted, Clemens disengages the synthetic. But all this time, and let's not forget about everyone's favorite madman, Garlic has been kept in isolation since his incident, still muttering incoherently, and wound up remarkably untouched due to his isolation from the vent system. Hearing of the hive's destruction, he becomes distraught, until he hears they manage to capture one alive. You know what happens next. The survivors gather together once again to discuss the freshly released alien. With the rescue team already in orbit and just awaiting the dropship's arrival, there's some question on what to do. Some side with Aaron, who wishes to hunker down and wait for the rescue team. Clemens points out that the rescue team is likely to be as ignorant as the last, used as puppets and influenced by a suit or synthetic who deems their crew expendable in the face of gathering a specimen. Thus do we get the debate. Is it worth it to wait and trust the company, or should they eliminate the threat now to keep the same thing from happening to the next ship? The prisoners side with Clemens, while Aaron nervously sits aside. The plan to lure it and trap it into the mold is formulated, with the prisoners delving into the vent shaft 2 by 2 to hopefully keep any individual from being captured. There they're set to play a game of tag, luring it into the maze-like corridors to keep it out of the vents, then luring it section by section into the leadworks, closing off its path of retreat. Casualties run high, including Clemens, who's pretty well served his purpose, one of the first to go. The prisoners bravely fight back whenever someone is grabbed, leading to a bloody slaughter, which nonetheless results in the alien trapped within the molding. But the same problem persists, with the alien fully capable of simply climbing out. Thus does Dylan sacrifice himself while Morse, having been earlier grabbed and badly injured yet saved, dumps the lead, killing both before he bleeds out. Meanwhile, the dropship arrives and Aaron finds it's not just the nearest Marine detachment or company ship, but a full-on company delegation. And as it does, it dawns on him that if the company had these guys so close at hand, they must have known about the other ship having been sent into orbit around Fury 161. And if they knew about it, they probably ordered it, along with the crew expendable priority. As realization dawns, he is led toward the dropship so that he may be asked some questions while the doors to Fury 161 are locked and the pilot light burns out. Not perfect by any means, but imagine, if you would, an Alien 3 which didn't conflict with the lore, but instead added to it. One not full of plot holes, inconsistencies, stupidities, and just plain old bad writing. A film which was allowed to make use of an incredibly talented cast to develop their characters without having to focus so much on the personal drama of an established character. Now that would make for a hell of a film.